Turkmenistan. So I would now invite to the floor our first fellow from Azerbaijan, Arzu Geybullayeva. Arzu is a journalist from Azerbaijan, from Baku, who received the 2014 Vaclav Havel Journalism Fellowship with Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. Arzu worked before at the National Democratic Institute in Baku and the European Stability Initiative in Istanbul, and she had an MA from London School of Economics and a BA from Bilkent University in Turkey. And Arzu has been a very famous journalist following the political crackdown in her country, and she will be presenting her current research. Arzu?
Thank you, Marlene. I wouldn't present myself as a famous journalist, but thank you. 3 days from now, my dear friend will be celebrating her 40th birthday behind bars. Her name is Khadija Ismailova, and she's an investigative reporter who, for the past 6 years, investigated and exposed the corruption in the highest echelons of Azerbaijan's ruling establishment, from lucrative business dealings to the offshore companies and properties that were owned and are owned by the ruling family of Aliyevs. Now, the recent Panama Papers that you've all heard about actually prove that Khadija's work for the last 6 years have been correct, but it is Khadija who's been sentenced to 7.5 years on bogus charges, which the court actually failed to prove. Now, while she sits in jail, some government officials say that there is nothing wrong with the ruling family acquiring so much wealth. In fact, just recently, one parliament member, whose name is Yevda Abramov, said the following, and I quote, "Who cares what has been revealed about the president?" referring to the recent Panama Paper leaks. "The president has a right to own a house, a mansion, and even a castle. President doesn't have to live off the salary he withdraws from the ATM. Is Khadija Ismailova even aware of what president deals with? You have no idea whose armpit president must smell and whose hands he must shake, just for the sake of implementing large-scale projects," end quote. While the reaction of this official and many other Azerbaijani officials is not surprising, the recent revelations of Panama Papers actually tell us and show us how some 143 politicians, among them 12 national leaders, have been exploiting secretive offshore companies and tax havens. Many of these politicians have been here in the United States shaking hands with the US administration officials and signing deals and contracts and becoming their partners in energy, security, war and terror, and so on. Now, some things just never stop surprising you, do they? But back to the case of Azerbaijan and to the case of Khadija Ismailova. Now, Khadija is not the first nor the last to be silenced in Azerbaijan. For over 2 decades now, we've seen how people like Khadija have become victim of a regime which has been moving further away from pluralism and democracy. It is a country that is ranked not free on press freedom and general freedom indexes for over a decade now. It is also a country that is doing quite poorly on the Nations in Transit ranking. And just to be clear, on the scale from 1 to 7, 7 here stands for being least democratic. It is a country where each election cycle is known for many violations, such as ballot stuffing, carousel voting. We are actually yet to witness an election that is not marred by violations and that gets positive feedback from the international observers. So why and how the government of Azerbaijan seized the chance to build a democratic government? And how has America's regional energy and security partner, the member of the Council of Europe, and a signatory to a number of international conventions, gotten away with its poor democracy record all this time? Now, the results of my research point to the following answers. Azerbaijan, since 1993, been ruled by one family. This is late President Heydar Aliyev, who came to power in 1983. And this is his son Ilham Aliyev, who replaced him in 2003 in yet another contested elections. Now, Heydar Aliyev also ruled Azerbaijan between 1962 and 1982 during the Soviet Union. Now, in such an environment, political ideologies, of course, matter very little. And in a battle between democracy and energy, the latter wins. As one Azerbaijani scholar recently described in her work, and I quote, As the oil and gas boom followed, Heydar Aliyev used the resources of the petrostate to buy in a ruling elite, which was consolidated by state ownership in the petro sector, establishing a structure that wielded a monopoly of power, end quote. So very early on, official Baku realized it didn't really need democratic norms and procedures to navigate through international politics and world of international affairs. Internal checks and balances that would later account for transparency and accountability were not really taken into account and neglected, and over time actually got lost in this whole complicated web of elite power and elite-based, clan-based relations. Domestically, this was actually evident in elections, as I already mentioned. Since 1993, each election was marked by violations, and also by muzzling of critical voices. On an international level, energy security and Azerbaijan's geographic location, geostrategic location, sidetracked democracy and human rights, especially as Azerbaijan became America's partner in war on terror and a country on supply route to Afghanistan. Revenues from the energy reserves opened a new chapter in diplomatic relations with the West, especially, described by one think tank as caviar diplomacy. Regime in Azerbaijan secured favoritism in the US and in Europe, while their officials wined and dined into supporting Azerbaijan just the way it was. More importantly, Azerbaijani leadership managed to convince some of the policymakers here in the US and in Europe that Aliyev's successful leadership was actually about ensuring stability and thus keeping Azerbaijan outside of the problem countries spectrum. But what is probably key in the ability of Azerbaijan to avoid Western criticism has been its lobbying strike force. Now, in the last year alone, Azerbaijan has spent over $20 million on lobbying here in the United States. Not surprisingly, it also is among top 10 countries that's been spending on lobbying here. By hiring such lobby firms as Podesta, DCI Group, Fabiani, and many others, the Azerbaijani government promoted itself. It explored business ventures and ensured there's enough support for the Azerbaijan caucus. Now, list of clients of U.S. lobbying companies in U.S. include our embassy here in Washington, D.C., the state oil company SOCAR, U.S. Azerbaijan Chamber of Commerce, and Azerbaijan-America Alliance. A little bit about Azerbaijan-America Alliance. It's quite an interesting combination. It was set up by the son of the Minister of Transportation, Anar Mammadov, and it paired with Dan Burton, former U.S. representative. And Burton's role in Alliance seemed to be to write beautiful op-eds about Azerbaijan in support of the country and to continue promoting Azerbaijan in Congress and elsewhere. And I would like to read one of the quotes from his op-eds that he wrote. Quote, "Azerbaijan is a valuable and tested ally for the U.S. From counterterrorism and non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction to serving as a stabilizing force in Afghanistan, Azerbaijan is among America's best friends. Few, if any, Muslim-majority countries enjoy as close and friendly a relationship with Israel as Azerbaijan." End quote. But when Azerbaijan's economy tanked, so did Burton's employment prospects with the organization. Now, in March of 2016, Burton actually left AAA, and his reason was because he's not been paid for the past year for his services. AAA, the alliance, actually left the lobby scene as of late last year. But before AAA left, it spent over $12 million here in DC by hiring lobby firms. $8 million out of those 12 were spent contracting Fabiani and company for their consultancy services. This $12 million, it actually doesn't include the $2 million that the Alliance donated to the Flight 93 Memorial, nor does it include the $2.5 million that Anar Mammadov paid to, surprise, surprise, Donald Trump, who received this for his work on the Baku Hotel, and it was meant to be one of the luxury chains of the Trump Tower. The named hotel actually never opened in Azerbaijan. Now, there are also lists of media outlets that are influenced by Azerbaijani lobbyists, and often there are op-eds or articles appearing in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Huffington Post, The Hill, and a number of others. So what can be done as part of an international reassessment of Azerbaijan's suspended democracy? Especially if Azerbaijan continues to maintain its positions here in the United States as America's great energy and security partner, especially as well as Council of Europe member state. In addition to maintaining an open dialogue with the government of Azerbaijan, I suggest some of the following recommendations. Now, United States and Europe should urge the government of Azerbaijan to unfreeze the bank accounts of a number of NGOs that were shut down starting in 2014. This could serve as a goodwill sign on behalf of the government and its will to promote democracy in Azerbaijan. It could demand reopening of Azerbaijan service for the Radio Free Europe, which was also shut down in 2014, as well as reinstating the FM radio waves for the BBC, the RFE, and Voice of America. Also, disclose all Azerbaijan government-funded projects, initiatives, and lobbying activities, not only here in the United States, but elsewhere. And continue assisting Azerbaijan's domestic reformers, especially and even if they're based outside of Azerbaijan, because most of them have left due to the ongoing crackdown. Because these are the people who are committed to making Azerbaijan a more democratic, transparent, and accountable country, and making the government more transparent and accountable. Only such an open and transparent approach, free of favoritism, can actually serve as the pillars of democratic growth in Azerbaijan and a future where risk-averse policy is really no longer needed. And if any of you are actually interested in the case of Khadija Ismailova, follow Free Khadija hashtag. On May 25th, she will be appealing her case at the Supreme Court. Now, this is the final stage within the structures in Azerbaijan. If this is unsuccessful, her case will go to the European Court of Human Rights. And if you are interested, you're also more than welcome to join the Global Action Campaign celebrating Khadija's 40th birthday across 40 cities. The one in Washington, D.C. is happening this Thursday at 12 o'clock in front of the White House. Thank you.